Western Civilization. How much do you know? My name is Russell Miles, and this is the 32nd episode of our Western Civilization series. In the last episode, we were introduced to the two British commanders at the Battle of Britton, Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding and Air Chief Marshal Sir Keith Parkes. Both men were of Scottish heritage, so I entitled these episodes Two Scots Who Changed History. After recuperating from ruins, Keith Parkes learned to fly and became an instructor. In mid-1917, he was posted back to France flying two-seater fighter and reconnaissance aircraft. He soon shot down one enemy aircraft, with two listed as out of control and damaging a fourth during one sortie. By the end of the war, his claim was 5 destroyed and 14 out of control. He was also shot down twice. Hugh Dowding was made Air Vice Marshal in 1929 and Air Marshal in 1933, and in 1934 he was knighted. He was an accomplished skier and winner of the first ever National Slalom Championship. In 1936 he became Chief of Fighter Command. Hugh Dowding's most notable achievement was developing the command structure for air defence. In the Great War, the British had experienced bombing raids by Zeppelins and large aircraft. While no more than a military nuisance, they were a political issue. Hundreds of fighters, anti-aircraft guns and observation posts were established, although the anti-aircraft guns were prohibited from firing as it was felt that the noise might worry civilians. Hugh Dowding adopted the command arrangements from the Great War, which entailed dividing the UK into zones or groups along the breadth of the country. Each zone or group had a major air base with satellite airfields accommodating a dozen or so fighter squadrons. Fighter Command would receive information from radar or ground spotters, mostly Home Guard, and then evaluate which were a bombing raid, a diversion or reconnaissance mission. They would then allocate squadrons to intercept. Sector controllers would direct squadrons to within visual range from where squadron leaders took over. The advantage of the system is that Fighter Command could undertake allocation of resources without being caught up in the details of battle. After the Great War, Keith Parkes was awarded a permanent commission as a captain in the Royal Air Force. His career included instructor, the School of Technical Training, and attending the newly formed RAF Staff College and commanding RAF stations. In April 1940, he was promoted to the rank of Air Vice Marshal and took command of No. 11 Group, responsible for the air defence of London and the southeast of England. Thus, Hugh Dowding was to have overall command of fighter defence for the Battle of Britton and Keith Parkes operational command. Now, hindsight can make some events appear inevitable because, well, they happen. Of course the Germans lost the Battle of Britton. Historians have pontificated that the Germans did not have a chance anyway. They didn't have enough fighter aircraft, their bombers carried too few bombs, the air battle was supposed to be a prelude to an invasion, but the Germans had too few transport ships, mostly ungainly barges, which could make little more than 2 or 3 knots in good weather, and the Royal Navy would sink them anyway. Moreover, the Nazis had no need to invade England. They occupied almost all of Europe, and once they knocked Russia out of the war, surely the English would negotiate. But this is not how things would have appeared at the time. Aside from the British Army having been driven from Europe with barely their shirts on their back, they were alone, dependent on food and fuel from the overseas, even grateful to the Americans selling them rifles left over from the Great War. The British government collapsed after the earlier military debacle in Norway. Winston Churchill was the leader of the minor Liberal Party when he became Prime Minister with support of the Labour Party. The leader of the Conservatives, Lord Halifax, favoured an accommodation with the Nazis. Churchill's leadership was fragile at best. The best way to think about the situation is to look at the American plans when they entered the war. They proposed landing in Europe in 1943, Operation Roundup. The British thought this daft. The American military was far from the monolith it was to become. What would they do with Private Polanski, 1 Jeep and a slightly deaf dashhound? However, Operation Roundup was predicated on a political collapse of the Nazi regime, an assassination of Hitler or military coup. When the Japanese decided that the war had not necessarily gone to our advantage, the Americans quickly landed troops and took control of the situation. They didn't need to invade. What might have happened should the Germans have inflicted one other defeat on the British? With merchant shipping strangled, Churchill pushed aside, while landing may not have been so fanciful, and defeating the RAF was an obvious step in escalating pressure on the British. A further issue was chemical warfare. In 1932, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin cautioned that the bomber will always get through. During the Great War, both sides had resorted to gas to break the impasse. When the Germans spread chlorine gas in advance of their attacks, British troops sought the expediency of urinating on their handkerchiefs and holding it across their mouths to breathe. Gas masks were soon commonplace. Despite 1 in 10 shells fired on the Western Front being gas, there was no breakthrough by either side. But how would untrained civilians, including women and children, cope with gas dispersed from the skies? The British and the Germans each had stockpiled such bombs. The British Ministry of Health calculated that during the first 6 months of aerial bombardment there would be 600,000 people killed. This estimate was surprisingly accurate, except there were 600,000 German civilians who were killed in the last 6 months of the war, the height of the Allied bombing offensive. The Allies had also developed a more effective technique than just dropping explosive. It was fire. They leveraged the combustibility of buildings to add to the destructive effect of their bombs. High explosives would wreck walls and foundations to spread the fire set by incendiary bombs. On the 23rd of February 1945, the British bombed the town of Forsyth, population 65,000, killing 20,000. The justification for destroying Forsyth was not any armament industry, transport infrastructure or military bases, but that its old, narrow streets and sandstone buildings provided little fire retardation. It was ideal to create a firestorm. The Allies had also ordered 500,000 anthrax bombs should fire not be sufficient to destroy Germany. Political leaders were right to be worried about the bomber. Our next podcast will cover the Battle of Britton and the roles of Hugh, Dowding and Keith Parks and the savagery of aerial warfare. If you like this channel, please subscribe and tick like. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I can be contacted at email russmills@iprimus.com.au. Thanks for listening.